to everybody joining here. I'm really excited that you're here. We have a great topic to discuss today, the Great Resignation. And before we even get into the discussion, I want to share a few facts and figures that give us a little bit of a dimension about the magnitude of this buzzword. And it's really not just a buzzword. What we're seeing is that more people have left their job in April this year than any other month per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we have topped that record every month ever since. In October of this year, in an article that I read in the Atlantic, it stated that this is mostly affecting low-wage service sector workers and should rather be called the big switch. And then in another article in Wired magazine, it stated that in the tech industry, we might as well call this the Great Reconsideration, which I found funny, because instead of just resigning, workers are reconsidering the importance of pay gains against flexibility, having more spare time, mental health, and all those things. Now, the Harvard Business Review states that resignation rates are the highest among mid-career employees. We're talking 30 to 45 year range, and highest in the tech and healthcare industry. Now, a survey from Korn Ferry found that over 90% of retailers are struggling to fill empty positions, even though nearly 1 in 3 offer sign-on bonuses and another third have instituted paid referral programs. And on that note, I just a few minutes before we launched this call saw on LinkedIn that Amazon has decided to triple their sign-on bonus. Reasons that the other side of the table states as a reason for resigning is looking for better meaning better pay, better perks, better culture, better bosses, and more. Now, we are here to discuss today what better looks like and how organizations can respond to this effectively and what's working and what's not working so well. With me today, I have 2 exciting guests. I have Misha Ann Martin with me from WorkHuman. Hi, Misha Ann. She is the Director of Workplace Analytics.
Hello, everybody. My name is Misha Ann, and I am the Director of Workforce Analytics at WorkHuman. WorkHuman is a human-centered technology company, and we provide technologies that enable people to talk to each other at work, but also appreciate each other for what they do at work and what they accomplish outside of work. I'm also an industrial organizational psychologist. I have been specializing in people analytics for over 10 years with a special focus on how different types of people experience work and how we can improve that experience.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really great to have you. And I know you also recently issued a report that talks exactly about these topics here today. So I'm excited to hear more from you. And we also have with us, joining from Aible, that's A-I-B-L-E, Tony Rome, Executive Vice President at Aible. Welcome, Tony.
Great to be here among all the experts. I'm certainly, Corinne and I have had a long association, and our discussion started months ago when she was writing a book about different working environments. Aible is a startup firm based in Silicon Valley, which focuses on machine learning, artificial intelligence. So when I say small, 35 people in an A round of funding. And I should also mention, I'm currently just an advisor to them and an investor in them, having given up my day-to-day obligations a little while back. But this invitation today really stems from a discussion that Corinne and I have had running now for a while about what's been happening in the workplace. I know a lot has been written, certainly lately, about Silicon Valley and the way people move in and out of jobs there. And a lot of the discussion has been, frankly, quite positive. And my discussions with Corinna actually are, in my experience, I should say, are exactly the opposite. What we did essentially through the wishes of the founders, was actually a positive experience for the workforce and for me in particular. So I'm happy to be here and join everybody's discussion around this topic of, I guess, the Great Resignation. I just want to make another comment. Interestingly, I think the rising numbers, I think we're holding steady at 3% of the total workforce, somewhere around there. And it's not a phenomenon that's just in the US, it's actually all across the world, really. Australia, Japan, Europe. And I find it interesting that the discussion topic today is creating a better working environment or something along those lines. And I guess one of the questions I had in thinking about it, because I read, for example, that Germany has a 6% rate of resignation, which surprised me considering there's a substantial, I'm going to call it a safety net or a welfare net around the working proletariat in Germany. They have quite a few laws and regulations that have sprung up over the years to help them. So it's a bar that changes depending on where you are. And it's a litmus test that really is an individual one, I think. I'm glad to be here. Sorry, that was a long soliloquy.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it was great because we just talked about, let's gauge the magnitude of this whole thing, yeah? And so, great point there, Tony. Now, before we get started, I want to share this little graphic. So our discussion today, I would like to steer it around these 3 dimensions here. I would like to talk about what is the organizational impact, what do those changes we propose have on the business. The other part, the very obvious one that's often being discussed right now, is what can we do to attract and retain talent. So we'll cover that dimension too, and I know that Misha Ann has a lot to say there. And then I would like to also discuss, and I know, Tony, you will have a lot to say there, is what can leaders do differently? What can we do as leaders to relate? Because there's something said here from the Business Insider. They were projecting that resignations in Q1 of next year will be amplified, and stated that managers must get a sentiment of employees to be able to relate better and identify what makes work more attractive and what needs to change. And so we also want to talk about this angle. What can you do as a leader? So I'll stop the share here. With that said, maybe we'll start with this report that came out, Misha Ann. I would like for you to share a little bit about the insights that you have gleaned from this report, which talks about things like burnout, how many people are affected by burnout, a topic that has been a taboo, I should say, for many years. You talk about mental health, you talk about the meaning of being thanked, and with that, I'll just hand it over to you and start this conversation. Yeah.
As a technology company, we do have data from our clients and data in our systems, but we also consider ourselves thought leaders in the world of work. So we do our independent surveys as well. And this Great Resignation report is one of those surveys and can be found on the resources section of our website at WorkHuman.com. So I'll give you a brief summary, but there's so much that we found in the last report. So first of all, we found that 4 in 10 people approximately were intending to look for a new job in the next year. This is pretty much double what we saw in 2019. So there's definitely an acceleration of people intending to find a new situation. When we asked people, why are you looking to leave? We found that flexibility was the #1 reason people said they were looking to jump from their current job to a new job. The #2 reason was actually salary. We also found a lot of demographic differences or nuances in our sample of job seekers. So we found that 65% of our job seekers were working parents, which correlates actually to our stress findings. We found that working parents were pretty stressed. And then also we found that people who were job seekers were much lower on psychological safety compared to the general sample. So thinking about some of the things that Corinna said before, people are seem to be looking for a new environment, an environment that allows more flexibility, that allows them to better juggle, work and family responsibilities, and also an environment that is just more welcoming as well, where they can be authentic and speak up and even make mistakes, as all of us do, without severely dire consequences to any of that.
Yeah, thank you. Have you seen something that you've done at WorkHuman or that organizations you work with are reporting that is working well for them?
So one of the things that we see work really well, and we found this in our independent research and with our clients, is creating a sense of connection and community. How do you do that? You do that by appreciating people's work accomplishments and also the things that they accomplish outside of work. In a recent study, and by recent, during the pandemic, with one of our clients whose workforce was mostly remote at the time when we were doing this analysis and study, we found that the people that reported feeling the most connected to their colleagues were the people that had been recognized most recently. So people who were recognized within the last month. So there's something about creating appreciation that serves to connect people to each other and makes them want to stay within that organizational community.
Yeah, you said that gratitude has a big impact, right? Receivers of gratitude are twice as likely to be highly engaged and 3 times as likely to agree their work has meaning and purpose, 4 times as likely to agree their company's leadership team appreciate their work, and 4 times as likely to be happy at work, 3 times as likely to say their company culture got better.
Yes, yes. And that meaning and purpose is so important. The research has been clear on that before. When you have meaning and purpose in your job and in your role, you tend to be more engaged at work. You're probably a happier person. But I also feel that in this time of chaos where everything seems to be cycling out of control, I'm traveling for the holidays, the COVID requirements keep changing. There's something North Star-ish about something centering about having meaning and purpose in what you do every day that serves to really enhance resilience and well-being and lower stress. And our research supports that as well. So people who are recognized most recently report higher gratitude levels and the lowest stress levels in our sample.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Those are really great. Before we go on, because one thing I would like to do is talking about your point there on what we can do to make people feel appreciated. I think Tony has a really good example there. But before I go there, I'm gonna share a link in the chat and to the audience here. If you would go there and answer that question of what would make you stay, right? Because maybe pay alone isn't it, right? And maybe you're overworked. Since Misha Ann just shared these interesting facts of what makes a difference really in your life, right? If you're connected, if you feel like you're being heard, you're being appreciated, you have purpose, yeah? Maybe there are other factors. So the question I would ask is, what would make you stay? What are the factors that would make you stay, regardless of whether the pay changes exactly to the level that you would like to have it? And you can either answer through the survey, or you can also, type a few things in the chat. I'd like to hear from you guys. Tony, I would like to hand this over to you right now. Throughout the pandemic, things have worked really well at Aible. You didn't face the same issues that everybody else is lamenting, and I'd like for you to share a little bit. You didn't have the Great Resignation, right? You didn't have all those dropouts, and you are 100%, if I understand right, 100% remote.
No one left. So let me go back. Misha Ann brings up a lot of great points about connection, right? So maybe a little autopsy is appropriate, right? So in March of 2020, when everything was going sideways with COVID and quite a lot of uncertainty about coming to work, not coming to work, the leadership team got together. Of course, we had always had weekly meetings, business-related meetings, but we got together with everybody in the firm, and we ask everyone a basic question. If you could come back, because everybody was dispersed, right? And working remotely. And as a tech company, it's easy for us to work remotely. Some of the cohorts within the firm, like the developers and software engineers, they had their own little, I'm going to call it a clique, but they would often enjoy being near and close to each other to collaborate in the ways they collaborated. But when the offices closed down, we all were working remotely. We basically asked the question, if you could come back to work, would you feel safe to come back to an office? And it was 50-50. And then, if you may not recall, but it was going to just be like a 2-week thing, remember? And then it became a 2-month thing and a 2-year thing. But our subsequent discussions with everybody in the firm is, if we went to an all remote work environment, would you be okay with that? And we had a healthy discussion around it, and everybody agreed, yes, it would work just fine. But we recognize that some folks were under more stress than others. And they might be people who lived alone or had families of small children, and so on and so on. We instituted every day, we had a conversation at lunch where it was essentially to talk about anything but work, right? So we had one colleague was just learning how to cook, and he would show us various dishes that he was, cooking that day. So engagement in that way to relieve some of the stress and strains of what was being created, I think. And to Misha Ann's point about creating that connection, respecting each other's bounds. And then we went even so far as to start celebrating what we refer to as killer achievements. It's a common theme or a notion that you can Google, but a killer achievement is anything that is important enough to be mentioned in a team meeting or a company meeting. And we, as a group, celebrated that. And I think this refers back to being recognized and so forth. And then over and above all that, on Friday nights, about 5 o'clock Eastern time, we would have game nights where we played Risk every Friday night for about 8 months. And that kind of helped everybody get over it. So yes, we didn't have the Great Resignation happening at the firm, but I think part of it was the engagement, the communication, the connection, knowing that there was a positive future that we were creating together was an important aspect that we shared.
Yeah, it sounds like the assurance that you gave that there was a safe space, and it was a safe space to talk about what's going on too.
Right.
Which goes back to the point that Misha Anno that made as well. And talking about safe space, there was a study issued earlier this year by Ginger talking about 96% of CEOs think they make work a safe place to talk about mental health, and that they're offering mental health, and that employees should know this and should accept taking it. Only 69% of employees agree that their CEOs are having their finger on the pulse, knowing what's going on in the organization and making this a safe place. And so question is, what do leaders do to get a finger on the pulse? How can you engage? I heard someone say this morning, also talking about the Great Resignation, that leaders need to be checking in more frequently. How does this look like without you looking like a helicopter boss, without micromanaging?
So I am a fan of what I call the generous check-in. And I heard some elements of it in what Tony was talking about. We've all been told it's important to have frequent check-ins with your direct reports. And the research bears that out, right? At least once a week is that sweet spot where we start to see the great outcomes. It is especially important now as you can't run into people physically the same way you used to, but also how you check in is important. If you're checking in once a week, but you're only checking in about what the person is delivering for the company. Now, I'm not saying that's not important. It is for sure important, but if that is the only thing you check in about, it sends a signal that person is not very important to you as a person. So the generous check-in, as I've coined it, is about checking in with people personally, especially right now. How are you doing? But you don't want to go in cold, right? Because you're asking people to be vulnerable. And if you haven't created a space or an environment for that, that can be hard. Or the person might just tell you, oh, I'm fine, and they're really not fine. So what I advocate is for leaders to set the tone in this way. You tell your direct report how you're doing, you be vulnerable, you set the tone, and then you ask the person how they're doing. And I'm not saying to do that procedurally in every check-in, but I'm saying like at the start of a relationship, before you start checking in personally, set that stage where you first established vulnerability as well.
Use your emotional intelligence a little bit more
Right.
than, yeah.
We have a couple questions that have entered the group and just want to make sure we cover what's there. So Jared has made a comment and a question. He says, aside from the COVID impact, are we also experiencing another consideration as a generational tipping point / dynamic shift? And then he's asked, consider more baby boomers are retiring from workforce and more millennials are reaching mid-career and saturating management positions. To what extent are those things also impacting the Great Resignation?
Yeah, it's certainly a factor. So part of what counts into that Great Resignation, and I shared earlier, right, that some people have suggested you might give it different names for different industries, for different areas, and so, or different demographics. And so to Jared's question here, I would say, yeah, that's part of the Great Resignation, right? These people may not have resigned up until the pandemic happened, which now we have all had a good time to think about what's really important in our lives. And I think that's one of the contributors to why people say, I'm no longer willing to accept certain things, or maybe I've been sleeping at the wheel, maybe I've been very comfortable. To be fair, maybe I've been very comfortable in that position. And now I'm in the pandemic, or I've always wanted to work from home, or I have been considering retiring. I thought it was impossible. Given kind of the stress that is added through the pandemic, we all had to go through it. There are things that are beyond our control. What is in my control, right? And if I can retire, maybe I will.
And so Teresa Hansen has also made a comment and a question. She says, love what the speakers are sharing, great tips and advice about being effective in remote work models. And then as a question, what do the panelists think about companies invoking mandates and other policies that have started to trigger people to retire early or seek work elsewhere?
So one of the things I will say about this is that based on our exposure to a lot of our clients doing some, not a lot, but some of these clients that we know are clients that we know of that do these mandates, they're actually not experiencing a lot of resignations as a result. So the data that we have seen so far just does not support that particular narrative. And then my personal opinion, this is a very tough decision that companies have had to make, and there's a public health component. And so companies have been put in a really tough spot of balancing the safety needs of their employees with personal choice. And I think we should remember is that there are some people with young children, and and that are not able to get vaccinated. And I am worried that they will be excluded from things because of a fear of taking things home to their children. So it's a lot of things to consider and a lot of things to balance when making this decision.
A lot of things to consider. In fact, if you've been following the news, in New York City, Mayor de Blasio mandated vaccines for anyone who works in the city. And per Misha Ann's, comments, this is a very personal decision, which has become now politicized, aside from the health aspect of it, but it's become politicized. But de Blasio will essentially point to tourism is back in New York. Broadway's open, and that's a pretty big deal. Sporting venues, and so on and so on. It's not exactly even a fine line anymore. It seems to be, it has become a lightning rod, if you will, for discussions. So it's an excellent question that you can only resolve on your own.
Yeah, the question I would have then is, so there are different demands, and there are different groups that we said earlier are maybe suffering more than others, or it's more evident to us, like you mentioned parents. And so there are choices, or there are demands made by those in the workforce who say, hey, if I accept the job, here is what I want. Now, can we respond to all these individual demands, right? Everybody comes with a Christmas wish list and says, I would like to have X, Y, and Z. We certainly can't respond to everything. So if we think practically, what does this mean for an employer right now? What are the things that we should focus on? And what's feasible here?
Yeah, so the data is saying that most people want flexibility. That's the reason why they're looking for another job. And most people, not most, about 46% of our sample said that they wanted a hybrid working arrangement. Another 32% said they wanted to be remote, fully remote. So one of the biggest things that employers can do is offer flexibility around coming into the office. That's number one. Number two is create a culture and climate that connects people to each other, that people want to stay in. Create a community that people want to be a part of. And we talked about some of the ways to do that. Appreciation, relationships with your particular leader that is strengthened by generous, frequent check-ins. And the other thing that employers can do is to woo their own employees. And I heard this as a recommendation from our own CHRO, Steve Pemberton, and it stuck with me. So let's not forget the people that are already there. In order for them not to be job seekers, woo those people as well or as much and as much diligence as you're wooing external applicants as well.
Yeah, let's talk about wooing a little bit, right? That's an interesting one. And I covered a little bit on how to manage teams effectively in a virtual environment in my book, High Performance Virtual Work. But when we talk about wooing, right, we're not asking them to make a dance. We're not asking them to be entertainers. So what is it that we can do to woo somebody? Because again, like the demand can be high. And then I would also equally like to address the other side of the table. We are talking about leaders who we don't want to dehumanize. We don't just want to talk about the leader as an object, right? These are people, flesh and blood, who are concerned about their employees. They're probably looking at this and thinking, goodness, I don't want to lose good people. What am I doing? What can I do to woo them? What does it mean? What's required of me? What do I change now?
Yeah, and I know salary is not the end all and be all, but let's go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's interesting to me that we're talking a lot about housing prices, especially in Austin, where I am, that are accelerating and multiple offer situations, and it's getting harder to own a home. But we're not talking about the corollary of offering people competitive salaries. Let's remember that is a base need. And as much as we think about what's a competitive salary for an external, let's also think about what a competitive salary is for an internal. Make sure your internal people are taken care of in that way and that their base needs are being met. Because if they're not, then somebody else can do that. And it is my personal opinion that even if your culture is great and people have base needs, they want a house, they need to fund that college fund, whatever it is, they may choose to go to that toxic culture for 2, 3, 5 years and get their base needs, taken care of, and then maybe come back to make the sacrifice, so to speak, temporarily.
And just, I want to interject real quick here. Are you suggesting that the employer doesn't wait until the rattling happens and they do an assessment right now, the salary structure?
Exactly. And we have these silly internal policies sometimes where we say, oh, when you're promoted, you can only get a 20% increase. How about you just pay people with the salary, what the market is demanding for that position, or what they can get for that position elsewhere. Forget about those caps. That doesn't even really make sense.
When we say, we have this internal policy of internally promoting only 20%, you're forgetting that you're not operating in a bubble. You're up against the market at large. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And I just want to add something to what Misha Ann said before about flexibility. I think part of like a leadership style is to recognize that there are people work in different ways. And I'm not talking specifically about having small children or elderly parents who live with you. I know, for example, I can recall someone might say, today I had back to back meetings. And I would think to myself, what a miserable day that would be. What a miserable day that would be. I don't work that way. I have to allocate chunks of time where I just walk around and clear my head or whatever. So recognizing that as part of a flexible environment is important. The software engineers at the firm would be, if they were going to deliver something killer by Monday morning, you knew they were going to go work all kinds of crazy hours all weekend long and so forth. And then maybe on Monday afternoon, you might not see them. Jimmy might be surfing, and that's cool. You just have to, flexibility comes in different forms, is my point.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, it reminds me of the point that the saying that your productivity starts when the last meeting ends. Yeah, some people have such a full calendar, right? You have back-to-back meetings and there's a lot of talk and not a lot gets done. Now we can talk about that a little bit too, is it not how we actually structure work. Darren, I saw here, made a comment on connecting. How do we encourage or facilitate workers connecting in a remote environment? One of the things we have done ineffectively in an office environment and even in a remote environment, especially in the beginning, and Tony and I had worked remotely for a decade or more. And how this works. Yeah, and meeting culture is definitely one of those things that needs to be addressed. There is a meeting culture and meetings are needed, but how you structure a meeting, how you prepare them, how many meetings you allow, what cadence you set, and what channels you use for communication have a big impact on how effective you work together. It is very possible to connect very well remotely, but it takes intentionality. It goes back to Misha Ann's point to have, I forgot the term she used, but the caring check-in, yeah, to be authentic and to really make sure that there's time reserved for the connection between two human beings and not just between performance data. How much did you get done? Are there ticks and boxes? Here are the next level goals, right? We're talking to people on the other side of this. And I think there's a thing to be said about that. The other part, I think that, to Darren's point on how do we enable better remote collaboration. Now, there are a lot of good collaboration tools. The question is, are we really making an effort to ditch old habits? It's easy to schedule a calendar full of meetings every day and to call that work, right? And say, I did all my check-ins. I had 8 meetings today or 5 meetings and I checked in with everybody. But what's effectively getting done? And have I enabled my team also to get the work done effectively? Have I safeguarded? Now, again, that's one of the things I'll talk about in my book, is how do you allow time for people to do productive work and to safeguard that, to say, hey, every Thursday, no meetings whatsoever, right? Or you say 3 times a week in the afternoon, like those are our blocked hours, that's for productive time, to kind of be heads down on your computer and produce outputs, and where you don't have any other meetings. That's just as important, I would say, as also having those meetings that Tony mentioned earlier, where you make a real connection that also doesn't have to do anything with work, where it is a meeting. And you know, I don't know, you didn't share too much in detail, but Tony, I think there was a great story that you shared about how it bonded you and the kind of culture you created by setting time aside to meet in a meeting that was a business meeting, right? Like business topics are off topic.
No, I think I may have mentioned it, maybe it didn't come across, but once the team started working exclusively remotely, and we recognized that there would be certain stresses across the organization, we instituted every day a lunch, an hour during the day, where we would all to get together. It wasn't mandatory. If you wanted to join the call, you joined the call, but talking business was strictly off limits. We talked about family things, we talked about hobbies, we talked about cooking, we talked about everything other than work. And that was joined every day by the CEO of the company. Again, it's a smaller firm, 35, but you can do this with your groups, your individual teams, and so forth, to create that connection and that sense of purpose that goes beyond what you do every day for your work.
Yeah, I think it's something that's realistic, right? Again, like, we're not asking for the impossible. It's where you focus your attention is where you signal what's important. So if you're saying something is important, if your people are important, but you're not setting time aside for them, I think you have set a signal that's very clear there. Yeah, interesting. Do we have more questions come in, Sabrina?
We do. Yep, absolutely. And really great flow of conversation. This is great. We've gotten quite a few really interesting comments. I'm going to go back just a little bit. And Misha Ann, you included some of this in one of your comments, but we checked just to see if they had a little bit more info that they wanted on that. So the initial question from Carson Kress was, how far did the research look at the aspect that employees resigning because with their current job, it requires them to return to a physical location instead of work from home? And you had provided some statistics on that. And so we just wanted to check if Carson's answer was fully answered. And she said, in terms of the actual return to physical location, what she's interested in understanding more of is in the sense of the financials, that cost and time of commuting, how much did maybe that weigh in on this phenomenon?
We are analyzing data from a survey right now, another international survey. We're doing these surveys all the time. And what we're seeing is that actually not a lot of people are being made to go into the office. So only about, and this is an estimate, we're still crunching the numbers, but only about 15%. What we're seeing actually is that most companies are meeting the needs of employees by going hybrid. So like around almost 50% of employees say that they want to be hybrid. And when we look at what their current situation is, those percentages match up. So that's not suggesting that a lot of people are being forced to go back into the office and resigning as a result. We're just not seeing that in our data.
Interesting. And there was another question for you, Misha Ann, from Teresa Hansen. She says, very interesting point about base needs. How do you see base needs changing over the life of one's career? For example, when early in the career, the base needs might focus more on compensation, whereas later when it's more on fulfillment or the work itself.
That is a great point, and I completely agree. I did see some comments about salary and compensation. It is definitely not the only, and I'm not advocating that we do some of these crazy things that other companies are doing and just go way above market value. I'm just saying, let's make it competitive. Whatever your salary strategy is, let's make that salary at least competitive. I've seen in organizations throughout my career, people who have worked for the same company for about 20 years or so, and they start out a little bit behind because maybe they didn't negotiate, and then they get these 5 to 7% increases and they just never catch up. So those are the things that I'm saying that companies should avoid. Now, in terms of base needs changing, yes, when you're younger or earlier in career, you are trying to do things like get a house. This is just my opinion, right? You're trying to do things like get a house. Money is more important. As you get older and you're more financially secure, I don't think it's as important because you're a little bit more financially established. Maybe you've paid off your house, your financial situation has changed. So I do think that the importance of that factor changes over time. And now that you've made that comment, now I actually want to look at or categories by race, and I'm sorry, by age, and see what, because we already did it by race, ethnicity, and see if that changes, if flexibility is still the number one thing as people get older, or does other things take over? For younger people, are they more likely to say compensation? We'll definitely take a look at that. So thank you for that comment.
And then if I could just add a few comments to what Misha Ann was talking about a few comments ago with regard to going back to the office or not going back to, or somebody asked that question. Concurrent with that is how companies have come to realize that, yes, we can conduct business this way. We can conduct business over Zoom. Large global commerce transactions can be done this way. So the notion of the salesperson flying to and from meetings, and it relates back to that one question about cost and expense and so forth, you can mitigate those. But that's for companies that we deal with, that is a hurdle that they had to change internal systems to work that way. We all had to learn how to accommodate. Maybe it took a little while longer to actually sell things or get things done, but we realized that we can actually conduct business this way.
If we don't have any other comments come in, I think this is a great discussion. What I will do after we wrap up this roundtable is I will share some of the tidbits that we have heard during this roundtable with you. If you're not following me on LinkedIn, you can do so after this call. And in case you are finding yourself in the situation that you are looking for a career change, we have a program coming up starting in January. So if you're trying to make a complete pivot, which a lot of people have started doing this year, we've decided to create a career change program where you work with other people in a group together through either a fast track program, 6 weeks, or you go through 12 sessions over the course of 12 weeks, where we help you to gear up for that. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. Thank you for those great speakers. I would also ask that you would follow them. They have a lot of great things to share. Misha Ann and Tony Roma, you'll find them also on the profile for the event. And with that, I would say thank you also, Sabrina, for helping me moderate this. And have a great rest of the week.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay well.
You too.